A new magazine article is shedding light on the plight of the faithful in the oldest Christian nation on earth. Writing in Compact magazine, Sohrab Ahmari said in part, quote, Armenians face extinction in a territory stippled by their churches and crosses. Meanwhile, their nation state risks being downgraded by an Azerbaijan flush with natural gas revenue and emboldened by foreign policy elites in Washington and Brussels. We recently spoke with Sohrab and began by asking about what he found on his trip to Armenia back in October.
Well, I found an Armenia that is increasingly squeezed, and squeezed specifically by Azerbaijan, which is this, typical post-Soviet kleptocracy, but just happens to have a lot of natural gas revenue. And it's used that, first of all, to militarily beef up and to buy itself friends in Europe, in the United States, at the expense of Armenia, which is the oldest Christian nation. That is, the Armenians as a nation embraced Christianity before the Emperor Constantine did in Rome. There's a kind of, it's a multifaceted, complex conflict. Its roots trace to this region inside Soviet Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh, which the Armenians took after the breakup of the Soviet Union in a military conflict. And that's different from Armenia proper, and there's a kind of complex issue of how to settle this territorial dispute. In 2020, the Azerbaijanis took a whole bunch of that region territory back militarily, with Western arms in many cases. And now they're starting to squeeze both Armenia proper, where there was an attack in September by Azerbaijan on Armenia proper, right? Like not the disputed territory. That's what I saw. I saw the aftermath of these Christian villages that have been devastated by shelling. But now, more recently, in the past 2 weeks or so, Azerbaijan has imposed a blockade on the single road that connects Nagorno-Karabakh, that disputed territory, and Armenia proper. And what that means is that there's 120,000 Christians in Nagorno-Karabakh who are currently without electricity, gas often. They can't get critical supplies like medication and food. Flour is running out. And so there's a real humanitarian crisis brewing there.
What do you think needs to be done?
It wouldn't take much. We don't need to militarily intervene or anything like that. But, Azerbaijan has bought itself a lot of prestige in Washington just by becoming one of the biggest sort of spenders on K Street lobbying. And we need to basically send a very clear message, potentially backed by sanctions, that the blockade needs to be lifted, that any alteration to Armenia proper's territorial integrity and borders is unacceptable. It just needs to be restrained by Washington and Brussels. I have to say, to its credit, the Biden administration has been pretty great on this, and the Democrats generally. When they had the attack in September, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi took a solidarity delegation to Armenia, which many in Armenia credit with having stopped further bloodletting. The Biden administration has sent very clear signals. Honestly, in this case, it's often sort of Washington right-wing hawks who are very hard on Armenia and have cozied up to Azerbaijan merely because they see Armenia as closer to Russia. So they sort of want to punish Armenia without regard to the moral stakes, namely the lives of and the existence, honestly, of the world's oldest Christian nation. So a little bit of rhetoric, and also, the European Union has been terrible, just constantly praising the Azerbaijani regime. It's just a little bit of a slightest rhetorical shift. Azerbaijan is not that big and powerful of a country, can send the right signals from the West that thuggery is not accepted.
What would you want Christians in the United States and around the world to know about this?
Well, I think it's just really important to know that Christianity has roots in the Orient, that it's a Middle Eastern religion, which very quickly then took root in the South Caucasus, what we now call the South Caucasus, via the Armenians. And so that the Middle East is full of these indigenous, and the South Caucasus are full of these indigenous Christian communities who have a kind of, it's a kind of collective Christianity, Christian civilization, and that's worth preserving. And too often our foreign policy in Washington and in Brussels has neglected the well-being and the preservation of indigenous Christian communities that are some of the oldest known to history. And that's worth preserving where it sits, rather than tolerating, for example, the destruction of Christian communities has happened in Iraq and Syria, and then they leave, and we get them as wonderful refugees and so forth, but indigenous Christianity has been destroyed in its heartlands.
And Sohrab, before I let you go, just really quickly, I want to touch on something else. You worked for the New York Post when its coverage of Hunter Biden's laptop was censored by Twitter before the 2020 election. I'm curious, what was your reaction to the recent dump of information from behind the scenes at Twitter, and were you at all surprised?
Oh man, not really, not surprised, but frankly, infuriated. I'll just focus on one aspect among many. As you recall, after the New York Post published its first Hunter story, it got banned on Twitter. Not only could people not share it on their public walls, but you couldn't even share it in private direct messages. And the excuse that Twitter gave was that this was hacked material. And of course, the entire blue check media supported that claim baselessly without even looking into it themselves. In the case of the deep state, 50 former intelligence officials claimed that this was a Russian disinformation operation, again, without any evidence, and the media repeated that claim. So the explanation was that somehow the New York Post has hacked this material, which we always insisted was implausible and false. The much more likely one is the explanation we gave all along, which is that Hunter left this laptop at a repair shop and forgot to pick it up. Now, what was interesting in the recent info dump that Musk did, where he revealed what had gone on behind the scenes, is that Twitter executives in real time at the time, they all knew the hacked materials claim was false. They were emailing each other saying, this is a risible, implausible claim. So what should we say? And yet, the higher ups basically said, nope, we got to stick with it. We just want to censor this story, and hacked materials is the closest explanation we've got.
Well, Sohrab, great to be with you. Thank you so much for your insights, and God bless you.